Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a really unexpected presidency, Chester A. Arthur.
Right. Someone who stepped into the role after the tragedy of James Garfield's assassination.
Exactly. And he was seen, largely as this product of old-school machine politics.
The jumpman boss from New York, almost the opposite of what reformers wanted at the time.
So our mission today is to really dig into his domestic policies, his actions while in office.
And try to understand how this supposed machine politician actually ended up embracing reform in some surprising ways.
Yeah, we've looked at quite a range of sources, historical analyses, biographies, contemporary accounts to piece this together.
And it's that contrast, isn't it? The initial perception versus what actually happened during his term. That's what's so striking.
He wasn't elected president, he inherited it, and there was, a lot of doubt about him.
A huge amount of doubt. The sources really bear that out.
Okay, so let's start with his background. Before the White House, he wasn't exactly inexperienced in administration.
No, not at all. He'd been Quartermaster General of New York, which was a big job.
And even more significantly, collector of the New York Customs House. That was a major post.
Absolutely huge. Our sources really emphasize this. Even people back then knew he had exceptional administrative skills.
Running that customs house, that was complex, a major hub of trade.
It gave him, a real first-hand look at how the federal bureaucracy worked.
And where the problems were, presumably, the potential for corruption.
Exactly. And it's worth remembering, as you pointed out earlier, the federal government itself was much smaller then.
Right, not the sprawling thing we think of today. Like, the Secretary of State's office was pretty lean. Which maybe made administration simpler in one way, but also perhaps made the need for efficiency more obvious.
That smaller scale, our sources suggest, it kind of sets the stage for understanding the reforms later.
That's a really key point. It helps put those reforms in context. It wasn't like trying to turn around a massive modern bureaucracy overnight.
It was more focused, maybe, targeting specific areas. I think so. Areas where real, meaningful change seemed possible.
Which brings us, I guess, straight to the big one. Civil service reform, the Pendleton Act of 1883.
Arguably his most lasting legacy.
But Arthur himself, initially, he was pretty skeptical about the whole idea, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. Known to be. So what changed?
Well, several things seem to line up.
There were the Republican losses in the 1882 midterms, for one. That sent a message.
A signal that the public wasn't happy with the status quo, the patronage system.
Just spoils system, yeah. But the huge catalyst, undeniably, was Garfield's assassination.
By someone who felt they deserved a government job.
Exactly. A disgruntled office seeker. It just threw the dangers of that system into really stark relief.
Terrible tragedy, but it fueled this massive public outcry.
It really did. The pressure for reform became immense.
And into that environment steps Senator George Pendleton with his bill.
Which becomes this landmark act.
So could you walk us through what the Pendleton Act actually did, the main points?
Sure. First, it set up a bipartisan civil service commission. Their job was to create and oversee competitive exams for certain federal jobs.
Okay, so merit-based hiring.
That was the goal. It also banned those salary kickbacks, where appointees had to give part of their pay back to the party.
Right, that was a common practice.
Very. And it said federal jobs should be sort of apportioned among the states fairly.
And crucially,
new hires had to start at the bottom and work their way up based on performance on these exams, not just political connections.
Sounds pretty revolutionary for the time. But as our sources note, it wasn't an instant fix, was it? Its initial impact was limited.
Not at all. Big limitation. It wasn't retroactive.
Meaning all the current office holders, mostly Republicans, got to keep their jobs.
Exactly. Which led that one Democratic senator to quip it was just a bill to keep Republicans in power. Maybe not entirely wrong initially.
And it didn't cover everyone.
No, far from it. It exempted most federal workers at first, and all state and local government employees were outside its scope.
So a significant step, but maybe a modest start in terms of numbers.
Definitely. But here's where the story gets really interesting. With Arthur.
Right. This guy, steeped in the old patronage system, he doesn't just sign it, he actually champions it.
That's the big surprise. He appoints real reformers to that new Civil Service Commission. People like Dorman Eden, Silas Burt.
And Burt had actually been, what, an adversary of Arthur's back at the Customs House.
He had. Appointing him sent a powerful signal, that Arthur was serious about making this work.
And it did start to take hold.
It did. Initially, maybe 10% of federal jobs were covered.
Okay.
But that expanded pretty quickly to include big chunks of the Postal Service and the Customs Service, people hired based on merit exams.
That's a real tangible change.
Absolutely. And looking long-term, the Pendleton Act, it really laid the foundation for the professional civil service we have today.
Moving away from just rewarding loyalty.
Right. Shifting towards competence, at least in principle. And our sources also point out the impact on campaign finance. Well, if you couldn't demand kickbacks from federal employees anymore, parties had to find money elsewhere.
Increasingly relying on private donations.
Exactly. Which, brings its own set of issues about influence, but it was a definite shift away from the old system. A fundamental change, really.
Okay, let's switch gears. Another big domestic issue. Tariffs. There was this weird situation with a huge treasury surplus.
Yeah, a lot of money piling up, mostly from high Civil War taxes still in effect. And it was actually causing problems in the economy sometimes, shortages of cash.
And the tariff system itself was just a mess.
Totally irrational in places, really complex, inconsistent rates, hard to manage.
So Arthur saw this and wanted to act.
He did. He appointed a commission, and they came back recommending a pretty hefty cut, like 20–25% across the board.
Seems like a sensible move.
Ugh.
But Congress, not so much.
Congress had other ideas. They ended up passing what got called the Mongrel Tariff of 1883.
Doesn't sound promising.
It wasn't. The average reduction was tiny, barely 1.5%.
Wow. Why so little?
Basically, intense lobbying, different industries fighting tooth and nail to protect their own sectors from foreign competition.
And you had the usual party split, too, right? Republicans generally liked high tariffs.
Right. Protect domestic industry. Democrats often wanted lower tariffs for cheaper imported goods.
So the mongrel tariff was just this messy compromise reflecting all those pressures.
Pretty much. And it showed how powerful those special interests were, even against a president's recommendation. Still see that today, don't you?
We do. And Arthur, on this, he was actually going against his own party, against those Eastern manufacturers.
He was. Which again shows him willing to buck the trend if he thought the policy was right, fiscally speaking.
Okay, what about government spending? He also made waves vetoing the Rivers and Harbors Act in '82.
Yeah, he saw that as classic pork barrel legislation.
Meaning?
Meaning spending aimed more at benefiting specific districts or politicians, sort of bringing home the bacon, rather than serving a clear national need. He felt it unfairly favored certain areas, especially in the South.
And his argument was, if we have this surplus, let's cut taxes and tariffs, not just spend more on these local projects.
Exactly. Which, again, probably surprised people who expected the machine politician to love that kind of patronage spending.
But Congress pushed back.
They did. They had the votes to override his veto on that one.
So the spending went through anyway.
It did. But his veto, his stand on principle against what he saw as waste, it's another interesting piece of the puzzle.
Let's turn to immigration. A really contentious topic in the 1880s, especially regarding Chinese immigrants.
Very much so. There was a lot of anti-Chinese feeling, particularly out west. Economic fears, racism, it all played a part.
And Congress responded with an Exclusion Act.
They passed one proposing a 20-year ban on Chinese immigration, which is, well, extreme.
Arthur.
He vetoed it.
Politically risky, you'd think. What was his reasoning?
He argued a 20-year ban was just unreasonable, and importantly, it violated existing treaties with China. Those treaties only allowed for a reasonable suspension.
He also mentioned their contributions, didn't he? Like building the railroads.
Yes, he acknowledged their economic role and worried about the impact on trade with China if they passed such a harsh measure.
So his issue wasn't necessarily restriction itself, but the length and nature of that first bill.
That seems to be it, because when Congress came back with a revised bill,
Cutting the ban to 10 years.
He signed it, even though he still expressed reservations about denying citizenship to Chinese immigrants already here.
It really shows him navigating a difficult path between his own views and the political realities of the time.
Definitely a balancing act.
Okay, naval reform. The U.S. Navy wasn't in great shape after the Civil War.
No, it had really declined. Ships were outdated, mostly wooden. Arthur saw this and strongly supported modernization.
And he had a key ally in his Secretary of the Navy, William Chandler.
Absolutely. Chandler really drove the effort. With Arthur's backing, they got Congress to fund the first new steel ships.
The famous ABCD ships.
Right. The Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, and Dolphin. Protected cruisers. Seen as the start of the modern steel navy.
And Chandler did more than just build ships.
Oh, yeah. He pushed to clear out some of the older officers, the ones resistant to change and new technology.
Kind of shook things up.
He did, and he was instrumental in setting up the Naval War College for strategy and training future leaders.
Was there pushback?
Some, yeah. Democrats were hesitant about the spending and blocked funding for more ships during Arthur's term, but that initial push, getting those first ships built, was crucial.
Switching topics slightly, there was also that dramatic rescue mission during his presidency, the Greely Polar Expedition.
Oh, that was a harrowing story. A U.S. Army scientific team led by Lieutenant Greely got stranded way up in the Arctic.
And rescue attempts failed.
Repeatedly. They were cut off, running out of supplies, real fears they wouldn't survive.
So Arthur stepped in.
He did. He set up a joint Army-Navy commission to organize a rescue. Congress approved the funds pretty quickly.
And Secretary Chandler was involved again.
Deeply. Famously, he authorized buying the rescue ship, the USS Bear, a tough vessel suited for the Arctic, even before the money was fully appropriated. He was committed.
And the rescue itself.
Led by Commander Schley, they did eventually reach the survivors, but tragically, most of the expedition members had already died from starvation and exposure. Horrific conditions.
A grim outcome, despite the effort.
Very grim. Arthur even mentioned the rescue, the effort at least, in his final address to Congress. It shows how these events, capture the public imagination and presidential attention.
Turning now to civil rights, a really tough area. Post-Reconstruction South, rights being rolled back.
Right.
What was Arthur's approach?
It was a difficult situation he inherited. Black Southerners were losing rights. The Republican Party was losing ground in the South.
So what did his administration try to do?
Their main strategy was trying to build alliances with other groups, like the Readjuster Party in Virginia.
That was a biracial coalition, right? Focus on things like public education funding.
Exactly. And they tried similar things with independent groups or Greenback Party members elsewhere in the South.
But that wasn't universally popular among Black Republicans.
No, our sources point that out. Some felt the party was abandoning its loyal Black base by making deals with these other groups.
Sort of overlooking the core issue of voting rights.
That was the criticism. Figures like Frederick Douglass saw potential tactical advantages, but others felt betrayed. And ultimately, it didn't stop the larger trend of disenfranchisement.
And the Supreme Court didn't help.
No, the court struck down the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which really weakened federal power to protect rights. Arthur couldn't get new legislation passed.
Though he did intervene in one specific case.
Yes, the case of Johnson Whitaker, a Black cadet at West Point facing what looked like a racially motivated court-martial. Arthur stepped in there.
Okay. What about Native American policy? Any shifts during his time?
There was a gradual shift in public feeling, maybe towards what was seen then as more humane treatment, though often quite paternalistic.
And Arthur supported some changes.
He backed increased funding for Native American education, which did happen in 1884. He also favored the idea of allotment.
Dividing tribal lands into individual plots.
Right. The idea, proponents claimed, was to encourage assimilation and private ownership. It later became law with the Dawes Act.
But it ended up being disastrous for tribes, didn't it?
Yes. Ultimately, it led to massive loss of native land, a policy with good intentions perhaps, but terrible consequences.
And the old problem of settlers encroaching on reservations continued.
Oh, yes. Constant pressure from settlers, ranchers. Arthur even opened up the Crow Creek Reservation at one point, though Cleveland later revoked that. It was an ongoing struggle.
On a completely different note, Arthur also oversaw a big White House renovation. That seems very him.
It does, doesn't it? Fits that gentleman boss image. He had refined tastes, loved elegant socializing.
And he found the White House a bit shabby.
Apparently so. He took a real personal interest, hired the famous designer Louis Comfort Tiffany.
Must have cost a fair bit.
It did. Congress funded it, but it was equivalent to maybe $2 million today. A significant refurbishment made it much grander.
Sadly, though, Arthur's presidency was overshadowed by his declining health.
Yes, quite soon after taking office, he was diagnosed with Bright's disease, serious kidney disease.
He tried to keep it quiet.
Largely, yes, but his health visibly declined. He took trips, hoping to recover Florida, Yellowstone, but it didn't really help long term.
And this impacted his chances for running for a full term in 1884.
Absolutely. As the election neared, it was pretty clear his health wouldn't permit a serious campaign, or likely even serving a full term. He made a sort of token effort for the nomination.
But the Republicans nominated James G. Blaine instead.
Right. And Blaine then lost to the Democrat, Grover Cleveland.
Making Arthur the last president, to date, who served a partial term after a death and then didn't get his party's nod for a full term.
That's right. A unique position.
So finally, how do historians look back on Arthur now? His reputation seems to have shifted a bit.
It really has. For a long time, he was kind of forgotten or just dismissed as a machine politician.
But more recently,
More recent scholarship gives him more credit for his surprising commitment to reform, like with Pendleton, for making good appointments, for his personal integrity.
so not usually ranked among the greats, but maybe better than his initial reputation suggested.
Generally, yeah. Historian polls often put him below average overall, but they rank his administrative skills much higher.
Zachary Caravel, one historian we looked at, said Arthur basically strove to do what was right, despite everything.
That seems a fair assessment. He faced his own health issues, his political background, but seemed genuinely committed to serving well once he was in office.
So, a presidency that really did defy expectations. Arthur's story, it kind of reminds you that people can rise above their circumstances, doesn't it?
It does, and that significant change, significant reform can sometimes come from unexpected places, even within established systems.
Makes you think, looking around today, where might we see similar surprising shifts or progress emerge?
And that's a question for you, our listener. Looking at the systems and individuals around us now, where might we be underestimating the potential for unexpected reform or positive change? What assumptions are we holding on to, and what possibilities might we be missing?